Hey guys, welcome back to NoBullBiz TV and podcast. I am here with the notorious, one and only mover, shaker. I don't know what else to say, man, but you're just like the total package, Abe Brown.
Hey, everybody. How you guys doing? And great to be with you here, Jeremy. And it's been enough time that we're like, we got to pump out a podcast here. Otherwise, people are going to think that we don't exist. And the thing about living is you want to be known as existing. You don't want people to think you're dead. You know.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been together, bro.
Absolutely. So how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm down in beautiful, sunny South Dakota today.
Okay.
So, I'm down here, as you know, working on our healthcare pilot for our healthcare company. And, missing you, missing the family, man, during Thanksgiving. But, you and I thought we'd jump on here today and do a podcast because something big is happening 1 week from now up in Canada. What's happening, Abe?
Yeah, I know. You know what? We have a federal election happening in Canada. And so depending on where you're listening from, Canada is a country. We're a democracy. And that means we get to elect our leaders. But we also have federal elections and provincial elections. And so the federal one is the national government. So it's the big one. And it's happening a week from today. And guess what? My wife and I, we already voted. And so,
me too, bro. Me too.
We got in on the advanced voting polls. And the reason we did that is because we like to beat the lineup.
That's smart.
Yeah.
That's smart. I did it because I was going to be out of the country. But you know what? I didn't even know that they had that early voting thing going on until it was actually my mom that told me about it. So that was great.
Yeah. No, it's great. It makes a big difference, right?
It does.
Yeah. So, one of the things we thought we would do is a bit of a podcast on it, not because, we want to take a political position. I think that would be, frankly, irresponsible of us in terms of using our listener, our audience's time, because you guys are smart and you can make your own decisions. But, what are some of the issues that matter? And also what really matters to entrepreneurs? Because one of the things about elections is they say have consequences. And, what that means is, that there will be consequences from this election, both good and bad. There'll be consequences on the environment. There'll be consequences on families. There'll be consequences on the economic realm. And, Jeremy and I don't think we profess to be environmental experts, though we're certainly supportive of environmental causes. And we're not doing this podcast because we are saying that we're relationship experts, but we are pretty in tuned to the world of the economy and entrepreneurship. And so maybe through that lens, we can take a little bit of a look at it. What do you think, Jer?
Yep, 100%. And, one thing I'd really like to touch on today, as I kind of brought to your attention before we jumped on here, was how could this election potentially affect startups and the startup community that we're really trying to build specifically in technology in Alberta?
Yeah, absolutely. And right across Canada, and
yeah, totally.
And even though the U.S., some of our audience is in the U.S. for sure, you're not so much impacted, but yours is coming. 2020, right? Big U.S. Federal election is happening, and so what are things that entrepreneurs need to be thinking about, and startups, and people who are in business realm. So why don't you get started, Jer? What do you think, man? This election, the economy, big issue.
Well, you know what? I was on a board about 2 years ago in Calgary, up at the University of Calgary, a bunch of healthcare CEOs, and we were all building healthcare technology products. And the crazy thing about it was all the products that we were building and working on, our projects were specifically to be marketed in the United States. Now, what's crazy about that is we were literally involved in an incubator that was funded by the provincial government of Alberta. And we were all building products to market abroad over the border. And the reason why is because Alberta has sent a very clear message to us entrepreneurs that that we can't get our products through, right? And this has been a big challenge for trying to grow and build a really talented tech community, specifically in Calgary. Calgary's kind of a city that's trying to reinvent itself, as the federal government has been really choking oil and gas heavily the last few years. And so there's a bunch of different, variables beyond that. But one of the most painful things, and I talked to Brian Jean about this when he was running for leadership, and he said that there was over 1,100 different pieces of software that was running AHS, and hardly any of it communicated with each other. That's why you would literally walk into a hospital and do some kind of an admin check-in, and then walk across the hall and have to do it all over again. And then we saw last year that the government made a decision to bring a piece of software in to start working on solving some of these problems. And guess who won that bid? It was a U.S. company out of Silicon Valley. So these are really, really frustrating things, because we know that things are happening. Deals are being made at the highest levels in government. And we've seen that firsthand. And once again, these are just opinions, right? I'm not trying to push any agenda here in any way with our community. But we've been seeing this specifically with the federal government in Canada, especially with the way the media is playing along, right? And it's extremely frustrating, especially for entrepreneurs. I know for myself in the tech space, and more specifically in and around healthcare, I had to make the decision, Abe, as you know, last December, to shut down our operations in Calgary and strictly focus on building in the United States, because there's just way too much red tape for us up in Canada.
Right. Well, and the funny thing is, for some reason, I think that some Canadians think that, and I'll talk about Canadians because I've been a Canadian my whole life. So guess what? That makes me an expert on Canadians. And I've lived in every major part of Canada, from the east to the west to the center. And for some reason, some Canadians think that jobs are created and that the economy is going to be good if the government does its work. And listen, I've got an MBA. I understand how the economy works. The government has some impact, but really, unless you're interested in a socialist economy, the government is a table setter. In other words, that means that they spread out the table, but it's Thanksgiving, and there's a big difference between setting the table and serving the food. And guess who serves the food? I'll tell you who serves the food. It's the small businesses. It's the entrepreneurs. It's the gals and the guys out there who are grinding it, and they're grinding it because they've got a vision and they've got a dream, and they really want to make something happen. And so, honestly, if you're, listening to this and you're thinking, well, the government, we just need to tax the rich, right? Well, guess what the rich are going to do? They're going to take their money to a jurisdiction where they're not taxed to death, and they're going to actually invest it in creating jobs there. That's right. And I think that, we do need to properly tax the rich. Absolutely. Everyone needs to pay their fair share. But in a lot of Canada, there's this small-mindedness, and I'm just gonna freelance kind of vibe it out here right now. And it's this small-mindedness that I'll call the crab syndrome. And the crab syndrome, it's this idea of a whole bunch of crabs, and it's kind of a terrible picture, to be honest, but they're in this boiling pot, and these crabs could actually all help each other out of the boiling pot. But the moment one of them tries to climb out, the other one's pulling back down. And that means, you're not going to succeed, bro. We're going to make sure that you stay stuck down here with us. In Australia, they call it the tall poppy syndrome. And it really just means the tallest poppy, that's the one we're going to cut down. And I don't understand what it is about our mindset here, that if somebody succeeds and if they grow and if they decide they're going to make an impact, make a difference, we just want to cut them down to size because we don't like anyone with vision or dream. And I think we need to get out of our own way and recognize that not everyone is a job creator. Not everyone is a visionary. That's okay. You don't have to be. But don't, have this mindset that if I'm not rich or if I'm not a job creator, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm going to go tax the death out of that guy. Because listen, that's not going to create jobs. I'll tell you what's going to create jobs is not the government. The government's only going to create government jobs, right? And they're not entrepreneurial, and they're not jobs that are going to reproduce themselves and multiply. They're jobs that, frankly, are only going to last as long as that current government is in power. And here's the other thing that's interesting. Let me just say this one more thing, and then I'll go back to you, Jerry. We've almost created, at least in Canada, two classes of people. Two, all right, not five, not 10, but two. And here they are. All due respect to public servants, and I have a lot of respect for public servants. Teachers and people who work in government offices, et cetera, et cetera. But that at least in Canada, these are the only people who have a secure job and a secure pension. You talk to any other Canadian, they don't have secure pensions anymore. They don't have defined benefit pensions. I mean, Jer, you're an entrepreneur. Do you have a pension? Nope. I don't have one. Guess what I've got to do? I've got to work and save. And the 25% of Canadians that are employed by the government, they are one class of people. And these are the folks with secure pensions. And then there's the rest of us paying for it. And I don't think that the public sector should be underpaid or demeaned. But what I do think is that we've created an environment where a lot of us are being taxed to pay for the few. And somehow that has to equalize itself out as well. Because if I'm out here creating jobs, which I am, then I should be given the same level of pension benefit as a person who works for the government. Why should a government worker get a better pension than somebody like me who's paying for it? And so when people talk about taxing the rich and taxing entrepreneurs, you know what they actually are talking about? They're actually not talking about creating, better pensions for people like me. They're talking about creating more programs, programs, listen to me, they spend all of the money today. Let's create a pharmacare program. Well, guess what? All that money that you spent is gone. Whereas a pension plan will at least think about the future. So that's my little rant, Jared. Sorry about it, bro. It happened. It was done. I'm over it.
Yeah, tell us how you really feel, hey?
Right on, man.
Well,
so how about you?
I think we're looking at a couple big plays. There's been a lot of talk, and I think this election more than many others is causing a lot of division, specifically between the West and the East. And we've had a lot of talk about maybe potentially Alberta, or a combination of Alberta and Saskatchewan separating from Canada if this election doesn't go the way that we want it to go. I think that's painful, especially considering that we've seen such a change federally per province over the last year or so, as provinces have re-elected new provincial governments. So I think that part hurts a little bit. We're always more powerful united. We're always more, we're always more better when we're together, when we're synced, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of truth, and I think there's a lot of frustration, especially where we call home, Abe, because we're both Albertans, more specifically Calgarians, and the painful part is that we send a lot of money to Ottawa every single year, and you probably know that number more than I do, but it's a very large percentage in terms of what the national contribution is per province. Are we not the highest?
Yeah, for sure we are. Yeah, for sure, without even a question. Yes, absolutely.
Right. So there's been a couple different versions of this story. Like, maybe Alberta could go and join the United States. I'm sure the United States would love to have our resources, right? Especially in the type of government that the United States has currently right now. The other thing in terms of Alberta and potentially Saskatchewan becoming its own, country. How do you feel about those narratives? How do you feel about those options that have been kind of thrown out there?
Well, the first thing that I'll say is that, I am a Canadian, and there's no doubt that my heart and soul is in this country. And again, like I said, since I've been born, I've been a Canadian, and I'm very proud to call myself one. So I'm not a guy who's out there saying, "Hey, everyone, let's separate or let's do this." But listen, I can understand where people are coming from, because there's this massive frustration around, why am I not being heard? Why am I contributing so much, but on the other hand, I'm not being listened to? And if you can think of any other relationship, right? I mean, imagine, I don't know, I'll just, let's say you're in a marriage, or let's say you're in a, I don't know, a business partnership, or let's say you're even in a friendship, and you're never being heard, you're never being listened to. Then of course, at a certain point, like you have to make a decision. And I think that that's the challenge for a lot of people. And, frankly, not just in Alberta, but in the western part of Canada. And I think that, people want to be heard. And, having grown up in Eastern Canada, because I grew up in the Toronto area, and I love that part of the country, but they're so massive compared to us. Like, they really are. So many more millions of people that, to us, to them, sorry, it's quite easy to not listen, because there's such an emergent need there. And in my view, I think it's so critical that somehow we find a better way to listen to each other, and we find a better way to compensate each other, and frankly, that we find a better way to work together. So there was a great article in the Globe and Mail over the past weekend from Preston Manning, and he actually said, we should reopen Confederation talks. And I agree with that, because that now gives us a chance to say, okay, how are we being organized? And frankly, in Canada, who really calls the shots lately is the Supreme Court. And that's a problem for me too, because they absolutely have a political agenda. And, it's been proven through articles in the Globe and Mail that the Liberal Party of Canada has, for many years, appointed judges with particular political leanings. And somehow we are supposed to think that just because I'm on the Supreme Court, I don't have political leanings. I mean, that's not possible. These are highly intelligent, well-educated people. Of course they have political leanings. And so, we should be, in my view, really looking at that as well, because, no, I don't think they're too professional to let their political leanings impact their judgments. I think they're human beings. And I think that what human beings do is they let their personal leanings impact every decision. And I say that as a leadership coach, as an executive coach. I say that as a person who spent many years doing therapy and coaching with folks. No matter how hard people try, they have to have a level of self-awareness that recognizes that at times, yeah, my personal opinions are going to impact my judgments. And that's happened for sure on the Supreme Court, without a doubt.
Well, yeah, it's powerful. I would agree with you. I mean, we've seen that obviously on the United States side since the Republicans have stepped back in, and the how important the Supreme Court appointments have been from the new Trump administration. It's been I mean, we've seen the reaction from the other side on some of these appointments, and basically how desperate they were to remove some of these candidates. So it's been interesting. I know for me, Abe, and I was sharing this with you before, but I guess my heart and my passion is with startups, because really, in terms of my experience overall, and more particularly because I'm running a startup again right now, and that's my life. So I often have people ask me, what would bring you back to Canada in terms of startup opportunities? And I think the biggest challenge right now is talent. We get good talent in Canada. We have great educational institutions. We have great schools. We get really good talent in Canada. But where does our talent go, right? Where does our talent go, specifically in the tech space, right? We lose a lot of our talent to the United States all the time because of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Because of wages, just because of the big picture. I guess the biggest challenge for me, being in business and maybe you can relate a little bit to this. You said that you're a proud Canadian.
Yeah.
When you think about being a proud Canadian, I'm sure it's not based on the way that the federal government is representing who we are as a country today. Because I'm actually extremely embarrassed to be a Canadian these days, especially down here in the United States, from a political standpoint. But you're right, I am a Canadian, and I was born in a free country. I was born in a country that, God forbid, something happens to me or a family member, we can go into a hospital, we can get the help that we need, and it doesn't have to be a question of whether we're in network, out of network, having coverage, having a deductible, not having money, having money, all these variables that people literally suffer from down here in the United States. It's a reality, Abe. We've got almost 55 million people in the United States that don't have any kind of health insurance whatsoever. Now we've got another 111 million people in the United States that have health insurance and they can't even afford their deductibles.
Yeah.
So talk about a messed up system. Mm-hmm. So I was blessed in a country, blessed to be born in a country that one of the most important things, which is healthcare, isn't something that we get to receive whether we're wealthy or not wealthy. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's a huge blessing. But when somebody in the United States says to me that we have free healthcare, that just irks me because you and I know we pay for it. Yeah. It's just paid for in a very different way than us coming to the United States and subscribing to an extremely good quality insurance program for our family. So, but it's something that we really don't have to think about, right? It's not a matter of whether or not we have a good job. So I'm very proud to be a Canadian on those fronts. I'm very proud to be a Canadian in terms of respect. When we travel in Canada through airports, when we're in airplanes, there's a different culture with Canadians than there is in the United States, right? And I'm proud of that. I consider ourselves to be very respectful and very polite in terms of some of the other cultures that are represented down here in the United States. And I'm not taking a punch or a jab at Americans because I love Americans.
Yeah,
I really do. And it's always been my dream. I've had my own American dream. It's been my dream to have American citizenship and, to kind of carry the dual flag, if you will. But I can tell you one thing right now, on the business map globally, we're not even on the radar, bro.
Yeah.
Canadians, we're not even on the radar. And one thing that I'm really hoping with this federal election is that we get a chance to play ball again. At least we get invited to the tournament,
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I kind of think, and I think when I look at my vote, I look at it through a couple of lenses, right? The first lens I look at it through, frankly, is the lens of my own personal sort of values. And so which political party best lines up with that? But, here's the funny thing. The very function of political parties is really to be a marketing company. And so, what I mean by that is most political parties will work hard to say, hey, we've got you, we've got your values, we get it. So I think the second element is not only, who sort of reflects my personal values, but who also has a plan to execute. Because, there's a lot of people I could sit down and have a coffee with in the restaurant and really we get along well from a values perspective, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to give them the keys to my car to drive. And so first thing I think about my personal values. The second thing I think about is, who's got a plan to execute. And then thirdly, I do think a lot about what kind of impact is this going to have on the small and medium-sized business environment. And I'll tell you why. And this isn't like Abe Brown statistic. Literally, in Canada right now, like at this moment, literally this second, did you know that 90% of all jobs, 90, are small and medium-sized businesses? That means that the big companies, the massive companies, these are companies that employ more than 500 people. There's only about that only 10% of all of the jobs in Canada are people who work for those big companies. And so what that means is that the small guys, the small girls, the small and medium-sized enterprises, these are the ones that really matter. And so what I look at is, which government, or politicians, sorry, by their promises will either help that or hurt it. Because if I want to destroy jobs, then what do? I attack small businesses and I attack medium-sized businesses. And, at the end of the day, I mean, I've worked in the homeless sector for well over a decade. So listen, I don't want to get nasty emails from people saying, I don't have a heart for the poor. I've been there and I've worked in those sectors, and frankly, I've been poor. And yet I didn't move from poverty to abundance as a result of having a government handout. The government looked after creating, again, setting the table, creating a fair environment, creating an environment where people were given a chance to succeed. Absolutely. But beyond that, I had to work hard, and I needed to have support. And so I think, without a doubt that, we in Canada have to think about, who's going to support the small businesses and the medium-sized businesses, because they're the ones who create a job. How do you break the cycle of poverty? I'll tell you how. A steady paycheck. Like, that's literally the only way you break the cycle of poverty. And, in my view, for people who are severely handicapped or disabled, absolutely, that should come from the government. But for the rest of us, that means a job, or running a business. And so I think a lot about, how do we create an environment for that? And so that's kind of my thoughts. What goes into your decision-making process, Jared, when it comes to selecting who you're going to vote for?
I think for sure character. This election, integrity is a powerful word. And, right now, whether you're left or whether you're right, we've seen people that started very early in support of the federal government, that we have the leadership of that government right now, and they've had to step aside because of integrity. I mean, there just is not integrity right now. And it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for us as a country. It's embarrassing for us as a province. But there's hope. And, one of the things, kind of circling back to startups, there has never been a better time to start a business than right now as a Canadian. Honestly, there's never been a better time. And it doesn't mean that you have to go into the same type of field. I was talking with you right before we started recording about a couple that very, very, very well, Andrew and Natasha from Calgary. And I'm just going to mention it because when Andrew and Natasha decided to go into the business, into the line of work, that they have now, and it's a very sad and very unfortunate thing that happened with Andrew's health earlier this year. But we lost Andrew. But thank God that Andrew and Natasha had started working on building a great business. Andrew, as you know, was in oil and gas. He was an engineer. And, Natasha was, a nurse, and they ended up going into e-commerce, completely opposite spectrum, and actually into, makeup, fashion. And it's incredible to see what they've been able to build as a couple. And now what Natasha has in place for her and her 4 kids, obviously as, a single mom now, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm saying that to encourage people, because there's never been a better time. When I say that, there's never been a better time. I mean, literally, you can come home tonight from work, jump on YouTube, and take free courses on YouTube on how to make millions and millions of dollars. The only thing stopping you from doing that is just the desire and the decision to make it happen, right?
Yes.
So there's never been a better time. So we really have 2 choices. We can get, whether this federal election goes left or right, it doesn't matter in my mind right now. It doesn't matter for me and my family, because we've made a decision to create. We've made a decision to build, and a government is not going to dictate whether or not that's going to happen for our family, right? And I know that that's the case for you as well. It definitely makes life easier for us if there's alignment in terms of, you know, where we live and where we actually want to do business. Because it's not easy, bro, being down here building a business when I'm thousands of miles away from my family and having to make those sacrifices. It's hard enough running a startup when you're away from your family. But to put that dynamic in the mix, and you truly have no choice because this is the way it is, you know, it just makes it challenging. But I'm telling you, man, there's never been a better time to make the decision and say, hey, you know what? It's time to start that business.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And you know, I do with you 100% agree, you know, that we can't allow whoever happens to get in power to, you know, fully consume our lives. But one thing I will say is that without a doubt, you know, there's an impact. You know, I remember when the current government in Canada was considering making some big small business changes, and many of them they made. Some of them they changed because of the massive amount of pushback. And, you know, I remember talking literally to a small business owner who was in tears because if these changes went ahead, it meant that they were going to have to essentially get rid of some employees. And these people aren't, you know, listen, I don't know any small business owner who works 20 hours a week. You know, these guys and gals are working 50, 60, sometimes 80, 90 hours a week. And then when, you know, at that, you know, time, you know, one of the politicians who's actually running in this election said that, you know, small business owners are cheats, you know, and trying to cheat the government. I mean, you want to talk about a heartbreak because, you know, it's not really trying to cheat the government when you're working 89 hours. And so my thought is, you know, let's support small businesses. Let's support entrepreneurs, people like you, so you don't have to go to the US. And then what will happen is we'll grow the economic pies. And then what happens is we will ultimately see everyone benefit. And, you know, yes, you know, I'm all for taxation. But, you know, there was another article that I read where the average Canadian, this isn't the rich, just the average, you and me, average people, were paying more towards the government in terms of taxation in Canada than, if you could imagine, our own food, clothing, and shelter. And, you know, I think that's really weird. You know, that's a little extreme.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So anyways, you know what, folks, I love what you're saying. Think about your values. Think about what kind of vision you have for the country. Think about how is it that you can step into the next realm and keep really going. You know, that's the bottom line, you know, and really be a person who doesn't get caught up in partisanship. I mean, you know what, I never got on my, I'm not on my Facebook page advocating for this party or that party. I just look at it through the lens of, you know, who's going to help my family, who's going to help small businesses, who has a sustainable plan. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. And you know what, I would also encourage everybody to, you know, if you're in a position, especially through this election process, you know what, especially with me being down here in the United States, Abe, I've had a lot of people come up to me, you know, whether it's in conversation or over the phone, and say, man, I just love Canadians. I just love Canadians. And you know what? We are loved and we are appreciated. It doesn't matter who the prime minister of our country is, because there's something beautiful about us. It's the spirit, it's the culture that we carry as Canadians into everything that we do, whether it's a conversation on the street, whether it's a conversation in business or how we do business. But there is something special about us. And I do feel that there's just a shift. I feel like there's a bit of a rising up, if you will, right now among people in our country that have just said, you know what, enough's enough. And it doesn't matter where I am or what I'm going to do or how I'm going to go about building it, that at the end of the day, I'm proud of who I am and I'm proud of who we are. because we are a people who really do care. We really do. It doesn't matter the message that's being sent from the federal government in terms of who the prime minister is, because you know what? When I meet somebody, and I know it's the same thing for you, Abe, that we're loved for who we are.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm actually really, really proud of that.
Me too.
So I think me, in terms of placing my ballot, when I was thinking about, who I was going to vote for, I was thinking about, who's really loved based on what they stand for, their message, the integrity. And if they were to walk into a meeting and stand before another world leader, what would that conversation, what would that dynamic be, right?
Yeah.
Because I know for you and I, it's a lot different in terms of Mr. Trudeau. So.
Yeah, and and I love what you're saying too, because somehow, and I've seen this in the United States as well, where we tend to demonize people who aren't like us. We're like, well, you're not voting for my party, therefore you must not care about the poor, or you must not, I don't know, support healthcare, things like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I wish that people weren't so polarized. And I guess my message here today is, number one, get out and vote. Number two, take a detailed look at the issues. And number three, be a person who then goes ahead and votes your conscience. And without a doubt, that's the way we build a great nation. Yeah, I mean, I've been on two different continents, one called Asia, the other called Africa, in the last year, where people openly, kind of made fun of our prime minister at the time. And that was in 2018 and also 2019. It's kind of interesting because, that was a lot to do with the antics of our current prime minister. Now, I just think that that's not good. I think that we as Canadians do want to make sure that we're properly represented on the world stage, and somehow some of that was lost, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean some level of hatred towards the current guy. That just means how can we do better, right? How can we do better? That's important. I think we have to think about that, don't we?
Yeah. I love that, Abe. I really do. And you know what? I guess just final thoughts in closing. I'll just share a quick thought and then turn it back to you to wrap it up. But I guess the biggest thing for me right now is, what can we do? What can we do with what we have, with where we're at? And I think that's been one of the biggest callings on my life this year. And I know that I've shared some of those details in private with you, but I'm starting to come out and talk a little bit more about that. And I really think that, in terms of, it's one thing to say that you're going to do this and you're going to do that and you're going to invest in this and there's going to be programs, in support of this. And I know that there is a massive concern this year, specifically in and around mental health. And there has been some tough questions asked through some of these side conversations and debates, with the current leadership and future leadership. What are you going to do to address this? Right?
Yeah.
What are you going to do to address this? Yeah. And I know that that's become a massive, it's become a major focus for me in my life, and more specifically with our company, what we're doing, because it is a problem today, and we have to make the resources available. When somebody says, I need help, this thing where they've got to wait, weeks or days or weeks to get help, unfortunately, it's too late by that point. So I think this election really is I think one of the things that I'm really looking at specifically myself is, talk is cheap, right? Check the scoreboard. Check the scoreboard. There's a lot of hate down here for President Trump, but you know what? Check the scoreboard. Don't compare him because of his crazy Twitter account, but look at the freaking scoreboard, guys. And so all the things that have been promised for the last 3-4 years from our government in Canada, right? What's actually happened?
Yeah. Well, and just to jump on that just a little bit, and listen, Jerry, I really want to appreciate, your vulnerability around the area of mental health, and I'm becoming more vulnerable in that area myself as well. And one of the things that is actually scary to me when you dip into the research, so you have mental health as a construct for just me and you as people, and how healthy are we? How resilient are we? How able are we to cope? But then when you look at entrepreneur mental health, it is off the charts in terms of risk, and in terms of the capacity for entrepreneurs to be struggling and toiling in depression and stress and anxiety, without anyone knowing. Like if I have mental health issues and I'm in a workplace that is at least supportive, and I have hundreds of friends who can walk into their job tomorrow with a doctor's note and say, I need some time off, mental health, and they can get it. They can go on short-term disability. And you know what? That's a good thing. I'm happy that they can. But entrepreneurs don't have that. They can't just walk in and hand a note to the boss themselves and get paid for the next couple of months to deal with their mental health issues. Like I think we also have to think about mental health, and what, again, I go back to, this is NoBullBiz podcast, right? What sort of policies will support entrepreneurs? What kind of governments will support startups? And, again, if these are the folks who are creating jobs, then how could the government help them from a mental health perspective? Because the more jobs you have, the more taxation you're going to have, and then everyone again benefits. So if employers, and I've been an employer. I mean, I've had 200 employees working under me, and we provided great benefits for our employees, and I'm happy that we did that. But what about entrepreneurs? 1, 2, 3 man or woman shops. These folks, they need it also. And somehow I think we've got to change the conversation. I especially think because entrepreneurs, we're it's almost like we're supposed to have our shit together all the time. And the problem is, and this, Jared, if you don't, and you've got to make that pitch tomorrow, and that pitch counts. I talked to an entrepreneur last week. He had one contract proposal that was going to make his year, and he had to make that pitch on one day last week. I mean, imagine your entire year caught up in a 30-minute presentation. You know what I'm saying? Yep. And this guy, listen, he is not just thinking about himself. He's got 10 employees. Yep. He gets that contract, and his 10 people are taken care of for the whole year. He doesn't get it. And what is he doing? He's out there grinding. Yep. And we're looking at him and we're saying he's trying to cheat the government like that. I mean, to me, it's just so crazy to me. Like, how do you even think that? That guy is trying to make money, number one, so that he can keep his people going. I know any entrepreneur I know, they think night and day about their payroll. They think, I've got these people, they could be working for someone else, they're working for me. I want to make sure I'm working for them. And I don't want them to miss a paycheck. I don't want them to miss even a second because they came and worked for me. So I'm with you, Jaron, and I love what you're saying. And then when you go beyond entrepreneur mental health, I think, frankly, we also need to look at mental health in general, right? And how do we support that? And addiction, better treatment for addicts. It's a huge issue today.
We do. Actually, our lead here, and I'll make this really quick, but our lead down here, who's been really, leading our onboarding pilot down here in Sioux Falls, she had a conversation with one of the top mental health clinics here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You're not going to believe this, Abe. So if you turn to me today as a friend and said, I have no idea what to do, but I want to take my life, I really don't see any way out, and I take you to this facility to get help, Abe, $3,000 a day.
Wow.
I want you to think about that. One of the biggest challenges that we have today, whether you're Canadian, whether you're American, whatever, but I know more specifically, where do we go for help? I mean, I'm not going to pick up the phone and start calling family and asking them for $25,000, $30,000 so I can get some mental health treatment, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, we really have to think about this, man. We really have to think about this, and you know, we really have to look at what support, what programs are going to be in place. You're right. I mean, there is no such thing as you and I, right, leaving the office for the day, leaving it at the office. There's no such thing. We carry this everywhere we go, you know.
Yeah, we do.
So I really feel like it's an important election. I think there's a lot of times where we'll feel that our vote doesn't count. You know, us is one vote. You know what, guys? Every single vote counts. So get out and vote. You know, get out and vote. And like Abe says, look at where your alignment is with your vote. You know. And just remember this, there's no such thing as free programs, guys. Somebody's going to get the bill.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to get the bill. And guess what? We're going to get the bill. Small business owners, we're going to get the bill. That's the reality. There's no such thing as free programs.
No, that's right. You know, and you know, I mean, somehow, you know, let's find a way in Canada, the United States, all over the world, to have, you know, political discussion and political opinions without all of the rhetoric, you know, all of the rhetoric of hate and, you know, all of this stuff that goes on where people label each other and demonize. And listen, it happens on all sides. Right of the spectrum does it. The left of the spectrum does it. People who consider themselves centrists do it, you know, and I just think, you know what? I mean, it's interesting because my friend circle, I'm going to be really honest here. I've got literally multimillionaires. I've got 2 billionaires in my friend circle, and I've got people who can't even make their rent payment. And I'm just the kind of guy, I love everybody, and I bring everyone close. And listen, you know, they all have different perspectives and different lenses, and that's okay. Do you know what I mean? Like there's so much value in just listening to someone, listening to that person who can't make their rent payment and trying to understand what's going into their psyche. What are they feeling? What are they experiencing? And then also talking to that billionaire and understanding, you know, what's going into his psyche and his thought process. And I think, you know, if we did more listening rather than shouting and, you know, rather than trying to fill up people's feed with our opinions all the time, just getting into respectful conversations. So, you know, thanks to you, Jared. This was your idea to have a conversation about the election. I don't know if we've helped anyone listening or watching today, but you know, I think our heart is really clear, Jerry, you and I. You know, number one, let's support the entrepreneurs, the small businesses, because really they are statistically creating the jobs. And frankly, you know, you'd have to be really ignorant not to see just how hard these people are working. But secondly, you know, who can help and support mental health, because mental health is a critical part of our ability long term to thrive. And we all deserve that. I don't care the color of your skin. I don't care how much money you were born into. I don't care your sexual orientation. I don't care, you know, your religion. Every single one of us deserves to thrive in this life and deserves to be happy. And so, you know, let's support mental health for each other.
Yep. Right on, man.
Right on. Hey, guess what, everyone?
Buddy.
Next episode, we're going to come back with more NoBullBiz. No more politics. We're going to dive after that right into, you know, talking and checking in with some entrepreneurs and people who are making it happen. So please do tune in.
Totally. Thanks, guys. Till next time, keep fit, have fun, and go start something great.
Right on.
Thanks, Abe.
Hey.